All right, here we go.
Here we are.
Ready?
Yeah.
Okay.
Do it.
Land can be super daunting for a lot of people because it is not as easy to figure out as a house, where you have the house, you have the inspector, you have a kind of a really set process. Land can either come from being, can be in the spectrum of being totally unimproved, AKA like nothing's been done with it, to being very improved, i.e. like you would actually have maybe a road and utilities and all kinds of things could be ready to go. There could be a septic system, a well, or you could be somewhere in the middle where you just have plans for a septic system. Maybe those are Board of Health approved. It is one of the things that can feel pretty daunting. And it was something that we as agents actually find a little challenging to work with as well, particularly because every town has different zoning requirements. And, and what people want to do, the towns need to know exactly what they want to do. If it's anything other than just a basic residential structure, before they'll even give you any real feedback on if it's going to work. So I was very happy. We as a team were very happy when Hudson came on the scene and, had kind of the specialization really of like starting with the land, starting with how do you choose land? What can they do in advance? How can they help people who want to build? Really figure out where you could put the house. How could you do that in a quick way that doesn't take, that's not like a 6-month sort of discovery process. So we get so many questions about this. We, love working with Hudson, and we have here Wayne and Amanda Congar, who are the founders, who are going to be here to answer a ton of questions about land. We have some agents from our team, but I encourage everybody to make this really interactive. Just throw your questions in there, and I'm going to be in the chat, and I'm going to be, funneling them over to Wayne and Amanda. And I think we can just get started. And I guess I would love for you guys to share something about Hudson, which actually, I'm going to get this right, is a home development company with a focus on design, placemaking, sustainability, and accessibility. Not an architecture firm, not a cabin company. So that is what they are and are not. And I would love it for you to kind of, just introduce that, and also introduce the land offering so people know what that means. I'm just going to
Wayne, do you want to introduce
myself?
Yeah.
And then I can talk about a little bit about land. Well, I'll be happy to talk about the land listing service, and now.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, so hopefully a lot of people are here because they follow along with Hudson, and also that you're fans of what Upstate Curious does so well, which we've always admired, which is being able to put context around why to live in any given place and really be a partner of buyers and sellers in this sort of process of real estate. And so we're always very mission aligned with everything that Upstate Curious does. And Megan, thank you so much for having us on. So Hudson really exists because for all those people out there that are thinking about building a place, and maybe you've come to that conclusion for a number of reasons. Maybe you've gone out and you've been bid up on a bunch of projects or a bunch of properties, and the cost of acquisition on an existing property seems too high. Or maybe your idea was, well, I'm going to buy a house, I'm going to renovate it. But then you started to get into thinking about the renovation and got a little spooked around what might be behind the walls and what the scale of that project might be. Or maybe you went out and saw that large-scale developers were out there building very large houses that seemed like too much house for too much money for too little quality. And so it's quite typical that people go through a home buying process and start by saying, well, I'm going to buy a home. But once they get into it, they kind of meet one of those challenges that I don't want to do a renovation, or I'm concerned about what it might look like. I don't want to go with a cookie cutter development house. And or I'm having a hard time accessing any properties that are out there because of price constraints. And so sometimes people come to the conclusion and say, well, I'm going to be a developer. I'm going to buy land and build something. But they're not land developers. They might be dentists or technology folks or designers or whatever it might be. And so the question is, how do you really go from raw land through to developing a property, particularly in a rural setting where you have disparate characters and there's lots of folks involved? And that's where we come in. We've developed what I would say is sort of two products. We have our standards and ADU design products, our home plans that we're able to modify and streamline a lot of the design process and remove a lot of the unknowns around construction pricing. But we also have what we kind of term as our conveyor belt. How do you go from land to improved land to a design to entitlement to onboarding a reputable construction company to execution? And how do you do that? And how can we do that as a partner to our clients, where we are basically offering development as a service, helping you make this, go through these series of steps to identify the right piece of land and then go through all of the steps after that. And so at the moment, Hudson is working across Catskills and Hudson Valley, but also has projects in Maine, the Carolinas, New Hampshire, and California. But what the common thread is that they're all quite rural places where it's difficult to get development done, and it's difficult to do it in a way that's both sustainable and removes a lot of the unknowns that usually kind of create fear around why not to do this. And so Hudson's sort of attached to that conveyor belt and our design products to try to address that problem for folks.
Mm-hmm. And so I guess way back when, in ye old 2021, Wayne and I were spending a lot of time kind of tromping around Ulster and Sullivan and Delaware County looking for land ourselves, because we were helping. We're in the process of building huts. We were helping a lot of people figure this out, and we're like, we also want to do this. And so we were, working with different realtors and also kind of like taking it up upon ourselves to show up to different lots and realizing like we don't have any context here. We're looking at trees. We're kind of like squinting, trying to understand how could this possibly be developed over the years. We got our car stuck in the mud.
Many times, yeah.
We tried to use like hunting maps to figure out where we were going. And so eventually that just kind of brought us to this conclusion that, well, it's not just us that is having this kind of issue with understanding how to buy land, how to analyze land, and how to understand what's a good piece of land for the goals that you actually have. So from there, we started to develop our land listing service, which some of you guys might actually already be subscribers to. And basically our team spends time kind of scouring the available parcels throughout the MLS and that are all kind of within about a 2-hour, 2.5 hour radius of New York City, which is where the majority of our audience tends to be from. And we find the lots that we feel are best representative of the projects that we think make sense for the people that are looking to develop a second home or are looking to develop like a future kind of family compound. And we use really fantastic tools to analyze the land. We're able to kind of give our perspective on how we would develop the land, what we think some of the costs might be associated with developing the land, and just offer kind of our perspective. And I think that's something that has been really helpful for people with beginning the process, starting to look for land. And it's a good first step. And then we've also kind of layered on these additional steps to help people that are digging in a little bit deeper. Maybe they're working, a lot of folks actually are working with Megan's team, where they're finding parcels of land, but they just kind of want that assurance that, yes, this parcel is a good idea because this is how it could be developed. This is the Hut's product that would make the most sense. Here's the potential cost that it may cost to actually develop it. And on the back end, here's how much it might actually in the future rent for, which I think is really kind of an intriguing thing for people to want to figure out even before they put an offer down on a piece of land. So we've kind of worked out these different levels of helping folks to analyze land before they even move into the next step of putting an offer in. You know, Megan's team, like I said, has been an awesome partner in kind of helping people find parcels, and we've helped on the other end help them understand how they could be developed in the future.
I think it's also, you know, important to remember that unless you're sort of Ted Turner, nobody's goal is to just own raw land. Very few people. And so they're kind of always coming to the land parcel with a project in mind, which means that you need to sort of understand the ambition and then evaluate the parcel against that ambition. And so if somebody says, I've got this goal where I want my house and a live work studio and a future guest cottage, and maybe I want to subdivide off a piece, and then I also want to do farming and have an agricultural designation, there's a lot of land uses in that. And so just because the land is big, or just because it's sort of diverse in its natural features, it's not always going to support all of those qualities and all of those ambitions. And so one of the things that we're always trying to do is sort of reconcile between, and sometimes people feel like it's a little early where we're saying, what is this land going to be for you in 5 years? What's going to be built there? What are you going to be doing there? How are you going to utilize it? And then we kind of back all the way in and say, all right, well, we need to find parcels that could potentially achieve those in towns that are open to those sorts of uses, without getting held up in permitting forever, or in special use, or whatever it might be. And so I think that that's always really key in thinking about land, is that the goal usually isn't just to have the raw land. The goal is to create a project on top of it. And so what's not really out there today, and one of the things we asked ourselves when building Land.NYC was, you know, like Zillow, Trulia, these are great tools for understanding rental properties and existing homes. They're quite bad at articulating to people what the opportunity is of a piece of land. Because the hidden cost of after acquisition aren't clear, and the most important thing, the potential use or the potential opportunity of purchasing that land isn't really described in any way.
I am coming on here because I love everything that you're saying so much. And this is like the ultimate, like when we talk to people about buying a house, the conversation is more like, or if they're buying an investment property, it's like, what do you want to do there? Like, what are your goals here? Is it, you want to be an investment property? Do you want to use it a lot of the time? Some of the time? You're buying a house. What do you like to do on the weekend? Like, how often are you going to host people? Like, really get at like that stuff, because it is so wild actually. And when you get to usage, which can happen, which can also come up with homes, a lot of people will tell us, yeah, I want a farm. I want to have like a little farm. And I think like, it's like, oh God, we have to be like, maybe it's like agricultural zoning. And then if I know it's just like, they just want some chickens.
Yeah, right.
And you know, and a vegetable garden, which, so the zoning codes have very specific definitions of like when you would need to, like, if you're going to slaughter 200 chickens, I don't know, like, you know, I mean, honestly, sometimes a lot of weird stuff falls under the like, a lot of weird stuff falls under the like, as of right, sort of like what to do with a residential home thing when it comes to stuff like that. But I think that is, so I want to say that number one, like we didn't do a 5 things you should know, but I'm gonna say number one thing you should know is have a vision for the very end.
Yeah. Yeah, because it's also, you know, one of the things that we find too is that after we help people source land, the second thing that we get into is master planning. So we have a kind of our second phase is around sort of pre-construction services, pre-development services, which means understanding land use and zoning, but also site planning and master planning. I think that there's a difference between those. Master planning is sort of putting to paper a vision for what this place might be 5 or 10 years down the line. Site planning is what do you need to permit for today? And they're usually different things, that people's appetite for what they're going to build now versus how wide open their eyes are for how they might grow into a property are usually different. And that matters on the land sourcing side and thinking about how to use the land, because you're going to be trenching through it. You're going to be placing wells and septics. And so you don't want to do that twice or three times, or digging things up over and over again. You want to think about where you're headed with this place, set up a lot of that infrastructure that's sort of hidden and underneath the ground, and then grow into the property from there above ground.
I literally love that. And that is, I feel like the way that most people could, the way that many people could probably understand this, the easiest parallel is if you're buying a house that needs work. So you're like, you're looking at the house and you're like, okay, I definitely want to do that kitchen. I want to do that.
Yeah.
And I know when I open a wall, or hopefully, you know, when you open a wall, you don't know what you're going to find, so that you're budgeting a bunch of extra money and time for like what mysterious things are lurking. But it's the same thing. Like, you're looking at the house. And by the way, this gets into one of the questions is about financing and how you can finance land and construction projects. But both renovation loans, you know, and construction projects, you can finance the whole thing.
Sure.
You can finance the land also, and they will appraise it based on the plans that these guys develop. So they will do an appraisal at the beginning saying, if you do everything you say you're going to do, it's going to be worth this much. And then at the very end of the project, they come back and they go, okay, Wayne, you said there was going to be a pool and there was going to be, you know, Wolf appliances, but there's actually just like a kiddie pool in the backyard. Like, you know,
there's a 19
whatever. And so then they, you know,
fridge.
So they just want to check that everything's okay.
Well, and I think, you know, the other thing with what you brought up a really good point about the parallels between renovation and new construction. And so one of the things we find ourselves saying a lot is that renovation projects go sideways based on the condition of the existing house. New construction goes sideways based on the condition of the land. And so it's very, very similar. But the benefit of land is that you can poke around on it beforehand. So unlike before you buy a house and you put it under agreement,
you don't let you break the walls. And
you can't come in with a sledgehammer and start looking around. Whereas with new construction, you have this really important period after you put the property under contract, where you have a due diligence period. You can understand what's going on with this place. You can get your land engineer, a septic engineer, you can complete a perk test, you can have a survey done, you can do all of these things to understand whether the land is going to support your ambition. And it is the best investment you can make after putting your land under agreement. And so, you know, one of the recommendations that we make is, if you really love a piece of land, see how little you can take it off the market for. You know, kind of put it under agreement, make sure that you have due diligence clauses in your contract, and then give yourself a nice wide berth to figure it out and say, hey, I need 90 days to sort out like what scale of septic this can support, what are the well conditions in the area, what does the ground condition look like. And if the property doesn't meet your ambition, then, you know, you walk away from it and you get your deposit back. And all you really spent was your due diligence cost, which is quite reasonable. And so we can speak from experience that the benefit of walking away when it doesn't support your ambition, rather than sort of bulldozing through and trying to make it work, is well worth that due diligence investment up front.
So what would you guys say is the cost for due diligence? Like, and again, I know, so, and this is where it really depends, but let's say it's completely raw land, and you're having to figure out like where to put the road, you know, like you're going to need, so a perk test is the test that it's like very low tech. They just throw water in the ground. It takes to go down.
A hole in a bucket of water, basically.
Yeah. And that will determine if your septic system can be, you know, in like normal in ground, underground, middle, a little bit above ground, all the way above ground. And that really determines the cost.
There's sometimes they'll have to do what's called a deep pit test as well. That's dependent upon like the kind of soil that's on the land. So that can be a little bit more intensive and definitely more expensive, because it requires like heavy construction equipment to come in and dig the holes. But Typically, a septic engineer will be able to handle both. A lot of times they will defer the cost of that test to the eventual septic plan. We've definitely found that quite a bit. So there can be circumstances in which, you aren't necessarily paying up front for those tests and it'll be deferred to later on. But I think that's definitely like a much more very small town thing. But I mean, I think those costs are, like, I would say, very nominal in the overall scheme of the project.
Well,
Yeah,
it's
I would
like
say you would.
$1,000.
Yeah, a couple $1,000s. I would say after you put your place under agreement, you want to budget a couple $1,000 to go through due diligence and get the answers you really need.
I think that's what's like, so this is what, and I think that's important because I think that people like sometimes, because if you're buying a $40,000 piece of land, sometimes it feels kind of crazy to pay $2,000 or whatever to get it tested. But like having a $40,000 useless piece of land,
Right,
is costly. You know what I mean? Like if you have a backup plan, you're like, I could just camp on this and that's cool or whatever, then great. Then you don't have to worry about it. But otherwise, like, this is where, like, when you're buying a home, you invest in the inspection, which is maybe $700,000 for an initial inspection. And then they will then often recommend other inspections. So we usually recommend a septic inspection, but then the inspector might recommend that a structural engineer come, molds, pests, like all these different other folks. And I really do think that even if it sucks, because it determines that, like, it feels like it sucks because you wasted money on that stuff, but
you really saved yourself.
Worse.
No, you saved yourself.
Yeah, you saved yourself aggravation.
Yeah.
The main things that we recommend doing during this period of due diligence that are, like, crucial, because there's a lot of stuff that you could be doing. But the crucial things are to get the perk test, which is like, that's just, has to be done, because if you can't get a septic system there, then don't do it. No, number two is to have a real estate attorney review everything that can possibly be reviewed about the properties. You want to make sure there's no, like, outstanding liens or some, like, crazy right of way issues with the neighbors, or any just kind of, like, outstanding legal issues on the property that will come back later on. Right of way stuff is definitely something that is prevalent upstate, because there's a lot of those little lots that are kind of like landlocked, and you're like, oh, there's a driveway that goes back there, but you find out later on, that's only because the two neighbors that used to live next to each other were buds, and they let each other use that one little driveway. But then once they're no longer part of the picture, then you actually are, like, you have an issue that you could be trespassing. So those are the kinds of things that you always want to have a real estate attorney look into. And I think honestly, those are the two big things: are does the soil perk, and
is what you're buying what you're buying. I think that is what you're buying what you're buying. Like is what is being presented, what's actually surveyed. And I think that in the Northeast, in a place where people have been living for 400 years, and there have been a lot of hand-wavy sort of like relationships around, oh yeah, my property goes to the stone wall and then it goes back to the old oak tree. And, that sort of language is actually written into deeds. When you see some of the transfer documents where it's a 300-year-old parcel that has only traded hands twice, and it reads like the Declaration of Independence, and it's sort of like it's loose notions of where everything is. And, I find that to be really charming, but it's going to be tough down the line when somebody says, hey, your leach field is on my property. We've got an issue. And so, you really want to get the real estate attorney in coordination with surveyor, and figure out what the soil can support.
Yeah.
And I think that so some of these things, I mean, like a lot of the titles are like the more specifics about, like, is there a loan on this? They usually do that after you're under contract, but your contract will say, if they find out there's something hideous, you can back out, like if they don't own it or there's,
Mhm.
so, but it is good. The attorney can, you know, they can sometimes just take a quick peek at the deed, you know what I mean? And just see if there is something, as can the agents usually.
Yeah.
So I think that a survey is another interesting one, because like so few properties here have them, like even
Yeah.
full like residential properties.
Mhm.
And my thing, like, okay, this is not legal advice, so don't say this, but like my thinking about this is that I would save the money on a survey if it was the borders of the land didn't impact, like we're never going to impact anything I wanted to do.
Sure.
So that would
Yeah.
be like, if I knew I wasn't gonna like have my house there, my leach field, my driveway, my guest house, like if it was just like all my stuff's gonna be in the middle, I kind of am like, I'll save the money. And if I'm like a foot off or whatever, the risk, an attorney has told me is that it might be further off than you
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
the issue.
That could be the case. Yeah. And I think that, I think survey for us also means two things. There's sort of lot boundaries, but also topographic survey. And so when we move into siting homes or design execution and thinking about, is this going to have a basement? Is it going to sit on piers? Is it going to be slab on grade? What's the sort of like, how is the house going to meet the ground? The topography is equally as important as the lot line. And so
That's a great point.
as we make that recommendation up front, that in the area that we're thinking might be the buildable area, think about getting your topo shot for that region.
I will say that like to me, the equivalent, or one of the equivalent, like some of the things you're going to be able to see if you're like, you want to site the house a mile away from a major road, it's going to be expensive to bring electric, to bring internet, to do your driveway every time you want to plow the driveway, every time you want to maintain your driveway. It'll be awesome, but it's going to be expensive. So you're going to be able to see some of the things like that. To me, the one that I hear that is actually more common than septics going weird is when the excavation starts and all of a sudden they're like, uh-oh, this is like a ton of stone here that is now gonna raise the excavation costs significantly, and they're gonna have to, use all kinds of explosives. And that to me is like the equivalent of opening up the wall and being like, oh my God, I hate the former electrician.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I think that to your first point, I think that that's really an important one, that a lot of folks buy or have the ambition to buy a large piece of land with the idea that I'm going to be way back there. I'm going to put the house way back there. And then you start running sort of the math on what does it mean to get way back there, and it gets very expensive. And now your budget available for actual construction is dwindling and getting sunk into a very expensive driveway. And so we always find a little bit of that sort of push and pull right up front when we're thinking about the pro forma, the economics of the project, which is like, how do we find that balance between getting the house type that is correct for your space use, but also get it sited on your lot in a way that achieves your other goals, whether it's being high altitude and getting a view, or getting privacy, or being away from neighbors. And there's some sort of, ideal spot between the two. But one of the things that you'll find on land.nyc, and one of the things that, across our social, we're starting to present more of these ideas of how we would build on these lots. We're laying out those numbers and saying, in this lot, we would really privilege getting back there. It makes sense in this place. That seems like the right sort of investment for this place. That's the way to take advantage of what makes this lot magic. Whereas in other locations, it's already sort of so out there. You went down a dusty road just to get to the lot. That's like, it's already built in. You're already way back there. So might as well save some of your money and take advantage of the utilities that are at the road, and maybe only make your driveway 150 feet rather than a mile long.
I think those are such good points. And even just how the house faces. You know what I mean? That could make, like, you can feel pretty private with people pretty close to you. If there is 10 feet of, trees, like forested, like wooded area at the edge of your lot, and the house is facing the right way. And And I just want to stress that this is not like, it's not like, oh, I'll just pay an extra $5K to put the
Yeah.
driveway in. It's like tens of thousands of dollars more.
I mean, the math that we generally use, and again, this varies a lot by region, but the rule of thumb that we use for gravel driveways is $7,500 for every 100 feet, plus another $1,500 or so for every 100 feet of trenching for power. So $9,000 to $10,000 for every 100 feet. And so 100 feet's not that long. And so you start looking at a 20-acre parcel to get into the middle of that lot, you're spending a lot of money. And so driveway costs are pretty significant. They have real maintenance costs. I wanted to answer this question from Samuel Mann, where he said, how feasible are off-grid builds in case utilities are hard to connect to? And it's a really, really good question. One that on, like Amanda was saying in the beginning, that when we went out to find our own parcel and we have our we describe it as a bit of like a Hudson building lab, that a lot of the ideas that we think about for our standards, the ways that we think about what good sustainable development looks like in the region, and along with putting ourselves through the ringer of all of the things that we ask our clients to do, like run power and go through subdivisions and build long driveways and all of those things we've sort of done on our lot. But one of the things that we're doing there is building off grid in a place where we didn't want to run utilities everywhere. And so we have one of our ADU units that we're building that is fully off grid in every way. And a big part of evaluating the parcel was where might we get the right solar catchment area? And it's something that we think about on every lot, which is what's the sun path? What's the predominant winds? Where are the views? How much clearing might you have to do to achieve those views or get the right level of solar incidence for this to work? And a lot of these, along with like septic, what is a septic? What's a well? If you're coming from the city where you like, you have no choice on what way your apartment's facing. And it's totally like, you're not thinking at all around where the water's coming from when you turn on the faucet or where your waste is going when you flush. Those feel like, those utility concerns feel like not that fun to think through sometimes, but some of the most exciting things to think through on a lot are what are the natural rhythms of the place? How does the sun move? How does the wind move? And how do I take advantage of those things in the way that people have forever and try to tap into those and utilize those as a cost saver or as a way to start to understand my land without having to go through a ton of utilities work. And so, Sam, I think the answer is that it's very feasible. It does, and I think exactly. So you have kind of two sides of off grid. You have two sides of
building also, which actually you could mention maybe something that because somebody also asked who designed your homes. Was it an architect?
Yeah. So we worked with our
houses.
Yep. So our homes were designed and developed by our design team in coordination with consulting architects of record and structural engineers in the states where we operate. And so on any given project, when we go through, they're stamped and certified and sealed by local design professionals before being executed, making sure that they hit the unique requirements, not only of the states, but also of the towns. And so one of the things that you'll find, we had people here from maybe Ackerd and Kerhonkson right next to each other. Very different review process here, and also different perspectives on what a house needs to look like, what life safety looks like. And so we make sure that we have really excellent consultants that are sort of on the ground and know all of the sort of minutia of each of these locations.
Yeah.
One thing I would say about off-grid, just so that, because we get a lot of people who are like, we want to build like a compound of mini houses and stuff. So what I would say is that you probably wouldn't get, I don't know that you would get financing for off-grid building. It would be certainly harder. And some towns are not allowing you to do rentals with things like that. So it's like,
there's some interesting, there's kind of two flavors of why that's not being allowed. The one is, and we see this a lot more in like Delaware County, Northern Sullivan County, where they're looking to remove basically tiny hunting camps, things that can't be taxed, totally off-grid structures that they're concerned that people are basically homesteading on the land, and they don't have a way to treat that as real estate that could be taxed. And so usually that means either off-grid might be an issue, or under 500 square feet could be an issue. And so town by town, that's going to be different. And when we work with people on land sourcing up front and they say, hey, off-grid is a thing for me, then that's one of our starting points. Where might that be allowed, or where might that throw up a red flag for a local planning office? The other way that we're seeing it is on in sort of Northern Dutchess and Southern Columbia County, where the concern is really on short-term rental. And so people sort of spinning up rental properties at really no cost that are revenue generating, and again are not taxable. And so a lot of those towns just aren't taking very kindly to that, and they're looking to regulate against that, and that's the way that they do it.
And there's some, like, there are some that are, they talk about it as a safety concern, depending on, like, they want it to be a legal, like a fully legal residence. There's like things like, there's like rules against composting toilets and stuff that, like, I think that some of them also kind of come from like not having somebody park like a trailer, like just like that's meant to be mobile, like next door to you, and like just live in it forever and have like not like a proper, sewage system and stuff. So I think, there are reasons about it, but it's surprising. Like it is, like, I think a lot of people that we talk to are like, well, I just want a tiny house. It's no big deal. But it's like a lot of the towns are like, no. And if you want 5 tiny houses on land, that is way harder.
Now we're getting this special.
Then it's a hotel, basically.
Then it's a hotel.
Yeah.
That is like almost, when we see that, like, that's possible if there was like a bungalow colony there and you're putting it exactly where they were. But otherwise it's pretty hard. And that's one of the requests that we get a lot is like, I want to build a thing with 7 yurts or like 7 small cabins. And it's like,
we get a lot of those requests as well. A lot of people, especially over the last couple of years, have, kind of started, especially when the interest rates were super low, they were penciling out some pretty interesting ideas for how to capitalize on especially if they already had land owned. But I think as time has gone on, a lot of the towns have kind of started to catch up a little bit and are not necessarily as lenient as they were. But again, that's another thing that varies so much from town to town, even like village to village. So a lot of people ask us, well, I really want to, I really want to build a future Airbnb. Where should I go? Where can I go that will definitely never have regulations? Again, it's like, I don't know, because that changes literally from town planning meeting to town planning meeting. So it's one of those things that I think we'll just always have to you just have to kind of hope that when you're purchasing land and that's your goal, that it's going to not be too strictly regulated.
I think it's good to, I was just saying, I think it's good to accept that there's just always some level of risk with everything. Like you can buy a house. The second apartment I bought in Brooklyn, literally we closed. We had not yet moved in. We were like 4 days after we closed, getting ready to move. And the entire internal chimney in our co-op building just fell like right down. Like it was like carbon monoxide detectors. It was unbelievable. And it was, of course, it was in the historic district and Park Slope. So it was like everything. So 6-unit co-op building, I had a $20,000 bill before we moved in. That was like our whole renovation budget at that time. And I was just like, okay.
Awesome.
I think it's true. I think that the other thing that we're all like, we're doing as agents and these guys are doing as people that work with, as land also is we're trying to keep our ears to the ground to be like the town of Rochester where Aqueduct Hudson is about to change the rules of usage for agricultural land. So it's like, we're all trying to see into the future as much as possible. And to Amanda's point, like it feels safer to me to go with a town that just had a regulation, because it feels like you're going to get maybe 5 or 10 years of runway. But if New York State could come up with something tomorrow also, or the county. Right. So
yeah, I think it's it's also that one of the things that we find too, not to belabor this point of risk too much, but even towns and the way the code is written doesn't matter as much as town inspectors who interpret the code and
Such a good point.
enforce it the way that they choose to. And so in small towns, that's a guy, that's like a guy. And so I think I saw that one of our on the ground team is on the call right now. And, he spends an enormous amount of time meeting with town inspectors and floating like ideas of projects across them, not specific projects, just ideas of like, hey, what if someone wanted to do this in this area? What would you say to that? And so that was a big part of what we did early on, even before really sort of launching Huts, is trying to clear some of the runway on understanding with town planning offices what kind of things we're going to throw up red flags or not, so that we weren't sort of wasting everyone's time. Because there's a client comes and says, hey, I'm really looking to do this sort of wacky idea, and I'm going to do it in this incredibly restrictive town. Ideally, we have a little bit of the nuanced understanding of that place to say, let's look elsewhere, or let's water down that idea in these ways so that the spirit of it's still there, but we're just going to be fighting uphill and going into variance meetings forever, and that just doesn't seem like what you want to be doing. And so understanding the towns, but also understanding the people matters a lot to this, and not waiting, being speculative about it, not waiting until everyone's hopes and dreams are on this one execution of this project in this location, but instead having a little bit of a sense like, the way of working with this guy is this way, and here's the types of projects they want to see developed in that area. Because towns also they have codes that are about enforcing and restriction, but they also have revenue goals. They have things that they're trying to do. And so making sure that your project type fits into their agenda going forward matters a lot. And trying to match people who have nothing yet, they don't have land yet, they just have a vision for something, trying to match their vision for the town that is looking to do things like that is a big part of the puzzle.
I love this. I mean, and then also even to things like, I know a lot of folks, and I'm sure this is for you guys too, will say, I want to have my business on my land. So I want to, I'm a therapist. I want to have a small spa here. I want to have whatever it is. And that is very much a devil is in the details kind of thing. There are home occupations that are allowed 100%. And then there are ones that will never be allowed. And then there are things about like, it's cool, but if you do it, then you need to have a certain amount of parking, and you have you can't have a sign, or you can. And
one thing I was thinking of when Wayne was just sort of describing like the endless variance meetings is there was, it just reminded me of he and I at a town planning meeting in, I believe, Lexington, New York. It was us,
Green County,
few of the townsfolk. There was like no internet connection. Like it was like, we were kind of like in this little room, and I'm thinking to myself, we've attended a lot of town planning meetings in a lot of towns. And for anybody that is looking to do something that's going to require like getting a variance, or even just going through subdivision, go to one town planning board meeting in that town before you make the decision. Because if you're looking to basically do anything that's going to be, that you're going to have ask permission for, go to the meeting first to see, okay, can I actually envision myself like being here many times and like constantly presenting and asking for things? Because that's the reality of the situation whenever you're trying to like, subdivide or get approval to have a business on the land and get any sort of like zoning variance. For some people that might be an interesting way to spend time. For other people that sounds like kind of a nightmare. So I do think that is something that could be part of like your personal due diligence when you are looking around to select a parcel, is like really get to know that town and like how that very small municipal government works, because you're going to have to become part of that process, and you're going to have to, kind of ingratiate yourself to the folks that are making the decisions. And they care deeply about what is happening. And so do the other people that live there. So I think that's something that is just a good thing to kind of just check out when you are looking for land.
You know, I was thinking, and I don't know, Danny, would you be willing to come on here as a speaker for a minute to talk about your process, or you don't? Okay,
I'm here.
there he is. So I'm putting him on the spot here because Danny from our team built a house this year, and he is a trained architect, but like your process of buying the land and building, I mean, the land part seemed relatively smooth. What was your process? Because now we've been like, and you could, I mean, all the things that we're talking about that can come up are like, there are things that can come up, but like, needing a variance or whatever, the more improved the land is, AKA the more that's already there. If there's a well there and you can test and you can see that the water's coming up, you don't need to worry about it. But do you want to just like talk about because I felt like that part of your process was okay, or do you have any tips for that?
It was definitely smooth. I will say, however, there were certain improvements that were here that weren't necessarily improvements. And I think that we knew that going in, that the well that was there was probably not going to work. The existing septic for some old house that was here, I don't know when, which was too close to the creek, we knew was probably not going to work. And if the septic had to be moved, the well had to be drilled somewhere else because it would be too close. So, we kind of came in knowing we're paying a price for an improved piece of land, but we're probably going to have to do all of this stuff over, and we did. But for the most part, it was pretty easy. We did get a survey because there was a question of how much land we were actually buying, because this had been part of a much larger piece at one point that was subdivided. And was it 4.8 acres? Was it 5.3? It was kind of ambiguous, so we had to get a survey done just to make sure, and we were getting 5.3, so we were happy about that. But other than that, it was pretty simple. Down payment, contract, close.
What did you do for due diligence before you guys bought the land? Like, how did you do that? I mean, if you don't mind saying.
For Amanda and I?
Oh no, for Danny, to see like if he what he did specifically for his thing. And then yes, I want you to answer that too, like what you do as initial things. Did you guys do it? You did a perk test, or did you?
No, we didn't really do much of anything. I mean, we looked at the soil, we knew what the soil composition was here. We knew that it drained really fast. So we knew that was probably not going to be an issue. And when they did the perk test, we got the results that we were expecting. I mean, it's just, I think that we probably should have done a little more due diligence, knowing what I know. Obviously, we do this for a living, but sometimes you just really just fall in love with a piece of land and you're like, we'll figure it out, we'll make it work. Yeah. And it's what we did. And so we were, lucky in that sense that we did not have to put in a wildly expensive septic system or have any issues with, perk tests or anything like that. But that's a very real thing. On the other hand, we just found out that we have pretty high radon levels, which is something you don't really know until
because nothing's like trapping it until
you've got an enclosed space that's like trapping it. But not that would have deterred us, right? You just put in a radon mitigation system and you're good to go. No big deal. But yeah, no, we didn't do a ton of due diligence.
Danny, I think you brought up a really good point too. I mean, we've been talking a lot about like how much can you try to over strategize and understand things up front. There's a lot to be said for just magic, that some places, and we often say this, like, we have all these scoring rubrics and different ways that we think about sort of like analyzing lots for people. But the thing that we always say at the end is like, it also just like go there and see if it feels awesome. And if it does, then sometimes it's worth the challenge of going through it, because there is kind of always a way to make it work. And sometimes the challenge of the lot is where the design opportunity comes from. And so it's like, oh, well, it's all rock. It's like, oh, maybe that's actually cool. Maybe there's an interesting cantilever opportunity here, a way to pin into that stone, or some cool thing that we could do that sort of works with that rather than works against it. And I would say, you know, on our lot in Canosa Lake, we've got a 23-acre lot or so. Yeah, I mean, there was no due diligence at all. We walked through it when it was under 4 feet of snow and it looked like Narnia, and we were like, this is magic. Let's go for it. And I think that, you know, I think because of the other side of it, one, it felt like magic, but also, Danny, the thing that you said about the economics of the lot. And I think that this is important when thinking about land development, because anyone out there that's thinking about buying a raw piece of land, like I said, no matter what your day job is, now you're also a land developer.
Yeah.
And as a land developer, you have got a couple of marks that you hit, and it's not binary. It's not, I've got a raw piece of land and now I've got a house. The steps are quite different. What you have is a raw piece of land, then an approved piece of land. You've got BOH approval for a septic. You've done some work to understand that parcel, but you've also embedded it with some value. That, say you buy a lot for 100 grand, you put $20,000 of like approvals or revisions into it, but that $20,000 pays off in equity and stored value. And then you have an improved lot where you're investing in the improvement of the lot with well, septic, driveway, utilities. And what you're doing when you go through that is all the risks that we're talking about, you're de-risking the lot. And by de-risking it, you're making it more and more valuable for other people, along with yourself. And then the last thing that you have before you go vertical with construction is you entitle the lot. You've permitted it with the design for the house that's going to be there, and now it's shovel ready, if anyone's ever heard that. And so you have these sort of steps that you're trying to hit, where before you've built a house at all, you're creating value. And it's often that there's a whole category of land developers where they go from raw land to entitlement, and that's the business. That's what they do. They just bake in value on land. But the reason I bring it up for the folks here that hope to have a property that is their own in the future is it gives you optionality if you start to think about it. It's like maybe you started a project where your hope was that interest rates were going to be 3.25% and they were going to be that forever. And as you started to go through approvals and improvements and entitlement, they stayed there, but then what do you know? It's starting to creep up. Contractors a little slow coming around, and boop, now it's 7%, and my math has changed entirely. But fortunately, you've been sort of embedding value into this land parcel as you go, and you have options, whether you sit on it, whether you sell it as an improved lot, or whether you choose to go forward and refinance down the line. But I think that's always an important thing that we bring up when we go through our land sourcing and kind of pre-development services, is that we're kind of trying to pay for ourselves as we go and say, we're going to make this lot more valuable by going through this groundwork coordination and entitling it. And in the end, you will have more stored equity in this parcel. And that's sort of the part of this that people generally don't know anything about, and then start to get quite keen on as we go through. It's like, oh yeah, like now I understand this land development sequence.
I swear to God that this is one of the things that is so important what Wayne is saying, because it also impacts your time to building. So if all that stuff is done, if it's shovel ready, you can start building right away. The other process, especially if you need variances, it might be a year until you can build, especially depending on when you start you know, what the time of the year is, you know what I mean? Right. So if you like get all your permits and stuff and it's like December, you might not be breaking ground for a few months anyways. I really would look at it, and this is like, again, the easiest way to explain it. People are used to houses. It sounds weird, but each of those steps that Wayne mentions, it's like, oh, I remodeled the bathroom first. Great. So I now have a remodeled bathroom. Kitchen still looks a little meh, but like I got that. Okay, it's like, okay, now I got the kitchen done. You know, and then so it's like you're literally like it is that significant in terms of the price improvement and desirability to have land. And it is one of the reasons that it is so hard, and that is so hard to tell in some land listings. And when people ask us, what should the price per acre be for land? And it's like,
Where is it? Where is it in that sequence? Exactly.
Where is it in that
Yeah.
sequence? Does it have a
Yep.
view? Does it have a
Yep.
water feature? Does it have a beautifully like cleared spot? Like, does it have I
A
mean,
driveway.
we're selling a little house right now that's 200, it's gonna be, well, I think it's 240 something in Pennsylvania, right across the river.
I
from
saw
York.
that listing. I love that listing.
It's
If
so cute.
somebody on here should buy that, and if they don't, I might.
They
It's
really, yeah,
amazing.
no, that is really
Such a
cute.
great part, such a great little property.
And if that had been because it's 4 acres and the house is like kind of close to the road, across from the road is this beautiful creek and you own the
Yeah.
land right there too. If that road had not separated the creek
Yeah.
from the house, it probably would have been like $75,000 more.
Yeah.
You know, like, stuff is so significant like that. Like, how easily is it accessible? Oh, Katie, thank you.
There you go. Very good.
She's posted the listing. But this is a good question. I know I'm looking at the time, but is there an all in mind, like, I guess a price per square foot or a cost example for a 1,200 square foot house or cabin
Mhm.
with medium level upgrades? Is there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends a little bit where you are, but I would say good working multiple today to think about is between $375 and $400 a square foot. And so the way that we think about this is
And that's just for building. That does not include the
Building,
price of the
yeah.
land or the price of,
correct.
it's like you have to get all the way to the shovel ready part before
Exactly, yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, because well costs, septic costs, all those things can vary quite a bit, but I'm always happy to share what I think they generally are. Good rules of thumb on
Yeah.
lot is your depending on, again, varies, but give yourself $12,000 to $15,000 to build a well. Septic, assuming it's 3 bedrooms, give yourself $20,000 to $25,000 to build a septic. Driveways, $7,500 or so for every 100 feet. And so that starts to give you most of the costs that go into getting to sort of a build ready site. You have a way to access it, you have a way to drink water, you have a way to go to the bathroom, and you have some power there. And now you're sort of ready to go. And then from there you're building. And again, some variation is going to be higher as you go east across the Catskills and Hudson Valley, lower as you go west. But good working multiple, $375 to $400 a square foot. And I would break that up into 2 groups. There's sort of a shell cost, and then there's finish costs. Shell costs, like building a conditioned shell. Imagine a white box space. Look at Megan's space here and remove the flooring, remove the beams, remove all the furniture, but keep the baseboard or keep the heating system. And so you've got a conditioned shell. And so a lot of it's commodities pricing. What is the cost of concrete? What's the cost of wood? What is the cost of things that are the hard costs that go into the house that aren't really negotiable? Think about those at costing around $250, $275 a square foot to get to that spot. And then you have finish and fixture costs. These are, again, medium level upgrade, Ryan, means different things to different people, but this is your spot where you have the levers, right? Like you're not going to change the cost of lumber at your local lumber yard, and you're not going to change the cost of concrete, but you can change the cost of the windows that you select, of the tile that you select, the flooring that you select. And this is the spot where you're able to go up market or down market. And so it's always important to sort of recognize that, obviously you can go infinitely up, but I think that about 40%, 30 to 40% of the costs of the house, you have some control over. 60 to 70% of it, you kind of don't, because it's really in the commodities pricing, or it's in the size of the house.
He asked her, economies of scale, do in-network contractors and vendors offer reduced fees or costs? There's no in-network anything. Is there like that?
In-network to us? Like,
would you prefer Huts?
I mean, we have a really fantastic group of contractors and professionals that we work with. But they don't necessarily there's not necessarily like a deep discount that they can offer us and folks that they're building for, because they're still having to pay for this, the same cost for materials as anybody else would.
And
I would
higher
say
costs
that
for labor and like
Mhm.
fuel and all these things that.
I think the biggest benefit for our like in-network folks, whatever that means, our sort of preferred folks is that they really understand our product. And so, they don't have a lot of that hand wavy pricing where it's like, I don't really know what I'm looking at. And so here's a lot of extra margin here just in case I don't really understand this. They really understand what it is, so they're sort of as tight as it can possibly be, based on the way that our homes are documented and detailed. And Caroline, the 12 to 15,000 was for a well.
Yeah. I think that one thing I do want to say before we like hop off here is that we often have people coming to us saying that they want to build a little bit less so now, but because they think it's less expensive than buying a home, than buying a home that's already on the market. That is very rarely the case, because you're getting, I mean, it could be maybe somehow in Danny's case, he did end up with a bunch of equity in his house because he did a lot of smart things with it. But to me, it's like doing a renovation. Like, I don't believe, my advice would be, don't do a renovation that if you have $100 to spend, the renovation is budgeted at $100. You need to have a big buffer for these things. And in the case of building a home from scratch, you have some risk with the land, depending on how close it is to shovel ready. And then you actually have much reduced risk when it comes to the actual build itself, because they can put it up and they know everything's going to be straight. The risk that you have, I think, with building a house is that you get a little freaky with your finishes and you fall in love with like a bathtub and you're like, well, shoot, I'm spending all this money. Like, now I need, a standing seam roof or something.
Yeah, we find ourselves policing that quite a bit, because we start from the beginning where people say, here's what I want. I want it to be this kind of asset. I hope that it will be cash flow positive and equity positive. And then things start coming off the assembly line, like full renderings start to happen. We're on the site. It's starting to feel real. And it's like, wow, now I'm really going to go for this. And because we're kind of coming at it from a developer standpoint, we're often saying, hey, this is going to get upside down. This project's not going to pencil anymore for you. And it's not going to be equity positive in the beginning. It's not going to be cash flow positive if we go this way. And so that's always, a kind of a conversation that we tend to get to sort of once construction starts and finishes are there. And it's like, let's decide whether this is the sort of asset you're looking for or not. And there's always a distinction between second homes and primary home builders as well. And I think that that's a very different attitude and a very different sort of thought that we always want to get in our clients' shoes in the beginning to understand how they want to feel in this place.
I think it's a great point. And I know that, like, also this is right where it gets to your goals. If my husband and I, like, if we ever build from scratch our primary residence, there's no way on earth it's going to be equity positive, because he's going to be like, I want the fanciest, most minimalist everything. And like, I cannot see a seam in this house and there cannot be trim. And like, it will be wild, like, but it'll be what we want, you know what I mean? And so that's the thing. And that's why, like, I think it's important. And maybe this is the end. I mean, I think that, like, there's so much more to talk about here, but I want to kind of go through and be like, what's your like last piece of advice? But I just think that my best piece of advice is like, just work with these guys to help analyze the land, because and there are real estate agents who really specialize in it, but like, they're not going to do they're not doing a master plan. Like, that is not the job of the real estate agent. The job of the real estate agent is to help you find a piece of land and represent you in the negotiation and things. Like, we cannot, as real estate agents, do these things. We do often know, and this is why it's great to work together, like, what are the values of certain towns? Like, even what are some things that are happening in the future? So if you build a fancy home now, that's going to be A-okay in 2 years. And we're good at all of that stuff for sure. And I think a lot of us look at the siting and have seen so many homes and know where things could go. But to me, like, the fact that this exists as a possibility, as a service at this point, I would do that all day long for someone who is for everyone, not for someone who has anything. Like, first time home buyer. And I think that, if you can be flexible and you can be, just assume, like, have a little slush fund for if things go over, you make a change, or you decide you really need a sauna or whatever, then you can end up with something really amazing, really amazing. And I think that and I know that like I saw poor Danny suffering for an entire year, and now he's like a beautiful, beautiful home in this like magical spot with like an owl that just sits there and like dances for them on a fence. With, like,
Oh, that was a good
marching
amenity.
behind.
Yeah.
That's-
Became a
All's
disease.
well that ends well. So
Yeah.
maybe actually, Danny, do you want to say like what's your piece of advice for people looking at land? Do you have like one thing that you would say to people with your agent hat on, or as a you just built something hat on?
Oh, you're muted.
No, he's
I can't find the mute button. A piece of advice. I mean, I think that, you know, people tell you this all the time, but you will most likely end up spending a lot more money on all kinds of things. I mean, really unexpected things too. You know, like I did not think I would have to put out 12 grand to put in a water filter system. You just don't know what you're going to get when you drill a well, you know. There's just I think that just being really mindful of the budget and having that buffer is going to eliminate a lot of the stress around it. And then also, yeah, you can get a little crazy when it comes to finishes, and you know, I know I certainly did. You know, I was like 4 or 5 times my original budget on kitchen cabinets. Sure, they're beautiful, I love them, I want them, you know. So it's like,
that's why your house looks so good.
it definitely I think just being mindful of what could go wrong, and just accepting that it's going to be okay. And in the end, all of the challenges you faced, whether good or bad or whatever, like once you're in there, it almost all just disappears and you forget what you quote unquote went through. But you know, with these guys doing all this due diligence on the land and really hand-holding through the process and everything, I mean, I took this on myself. I did what Hudson does for you on my own, because it's the background that I had and it's what I used to do for a living. But it was just like, it was a lot to handle. So having someone to take that off of your plate would have made a world of difference.
What do you like? So that, I mean, I think, yeah, so essentially our 2 pieces of advice are: give yourself a buffer so you don't get stressed out and freaked out later. Just know that those things are part of the process, and work with Hudson. Hudson, what are your pieces of advice? Other than work with you.
Quickly answer Adam's question really quick. So Adam, I feel like there's we could have an entire hour-long conversation about financing construction, but if you hop on huts.com and go to the guides section, we spent a lot of time creating some helpful guides. You'll even find, we talked at the beginning of this chat about land due diligence. You'll find a guide to that. But we specifically have a guide about construction loan financing. So in lieu of kind of talking more about that, definitely check out our guide on huts.com. I think it'll be super helpful and kind of like walk you through what that looks like, as well as lots of other helpful information. But I'll say that my piece of advice for finding land, we have a lot of people that come to us at so many different stages of where they are. I mean, there's people that are like, I'm just starting to think about this. Where should I look? And it's like, okay. And then there's like, then all the way to people that are like, I'm basically a seasoned real estate developer. I just purchased 25 acres. I need you guys to help me with the subdivision, and like very kind of clear cut as to like what they're looking for help with, and everything in between. For people that are at the very beginning stages and they're really kind of thinking like, dreaming about this second home, or maybe it's the first, the first home they've ever owned. I don't think there's can be any way to sort of give advice about like where you should go, because it's a huge investment. It's a huge part of who you are going to be once you're there. So and again, we have a lot of guides on our website that can help you kind of understand some of the little towns that are really cute and charming in the Catskills and the Hudson Valley. But there's really nothing that can replace like actually hanging out there and getting to know the places. So the best kind of form of research and development is like just go on vacation. Just like show up and spend weekends and see like what feels good and where you want to be. And then it will give you a better sense of like, okay, this is actually a place that speaks to me. And now I can start to dig in and I can start to focus my real estate search, whether it's with Megan and team, or if you want to get started on just looking at our land listings to kind of get a sense. But basically, you know, you got to kind of feel it, and it has to be the right place for you. And nobody else's experiences are going to be the same as yours. So just go on some little trips.
There's so many good places. That's the other thing. It's pretty hard to find a real crappy place up here. So, all right, Wayne.
Yeah,
Last word.
I think Amanda's is exactly right. It's sort of, we spent about 45, 50 minutes here describing, and what's great is we described all the things that we know the things that can go wrong and the things that we need to uncover. The things that we don't know are what feels like magic to you. Only you know that. And so I think that often when we send people and say, hey, here's our short list of 5 lots that we think hit all the criteria, it's almost scientific. And then we say, go to them. And they're like, I went to all 5, and we're like, cool, like, how did our scoring set up? It's like 4 of them were trash. I love this one. It's all about this one. Everything in my life is about this place. And so I think you're going to feel that through the land itself. And don't forget that when you're going to a location, the Catskills and Hudson Valley are a huge swath of the world with real differences between each of these locations, and think about the town and the community you want to be a part of in equal measure to the land that you want to be on to escape. Because as much as you might want to be way out there, you also want to get a coffee, and ideally that coffee that you go and get is in with a group of people that you like and on a main street that you enjoy going to.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that. And I think having that vision of where I actually often, I mean, this is going to sound even weirder, but I don't mind ending on this too, is like, our job is helping people find houses or sell houses. And ultimately that is a big part of how you're going to enjoy your time up here. Like, you're going to put all this time into the land and the house, but a lot of it is just going to be because you're going to the farm stands that you like, or like the roller rink is opened up near us, or you like love this particular hike. So it's like,
I gotta go to that roller rink. That is like so high on my list of priorities right now. I've been following them on Instagram. I'm just like, I need to get in there.
I think that's just true. So it's like, in some ways you can also like relax a little bit, because you're gonna be fine, you know, like there's a lot of places you could end that you're gonna be just fine. So I think I really appreciate, Wayne and Amanda, you taking the time to talk here. And
this is great.
You know, and Danny, thank you. Impromptu, like a person who built research. Yeah. I just felt like we were talking about, like, I was just like bringing up everything that could possibly go wrong, and I was like, wait, we have an example here of went, you know, he's lived to tell.
How have you suffered, mister?
Just follow Danny, Agent in the Woods. You'll see the stupid owl and like his like amazing like covered outdoor living room, and then be like, and then you can write to Danny and say, the cabinets were worth it. So thank you guys. We'll send an email to everybody with information probably tomorrow with like links of how to reach us and stuff, but we're all very easy to reach and hopefully all pretty accessible. And I really appreciate everyone's questions. And yeah, thanks for being here.
So much. Have a great night, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.